You three criminals have been caught in a further act of seditious treason. Your only feeling was contempt for our society. Your only desire was to command. This council has no hesitation in proclaiming you all guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
Hello and welcome to the inaugural podcast of Phantom Zoned. My name is Adrian Torres. I'm your host, and I am got my co-host here with me, one Scott Daly.
Hello. How's it going, Adrian? I'm glad I don't have to host.
For now, who knows? Maybe we'll switch off if I catch the deadly Motaba virus or something like that. Also along with us, the other co-host is Matt Freeman.
How are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great.
All right. Just a word to everybody. This is the first podcast that we're doing for this, so there's going to be some glitches here and there, some kinks that will eventually work out as time goes on. But this is something that I know the three of us have kind of wanted to do for a little bit. It's an idea that and not going to have is there's lots of shows that are going to kind of cover the basis of what we're doing, but we're taking a different approach. You've got lots of people who are covering bad movies, but they're trying to focus on the movies that are so good it's bad. And while invariably we'll probably stumble upon a couple movies that have elements of that or may fall into that category, we're going to try to focus on the worst of the worst, the movies that are just horrible to get through, that cause you pain, that you continually think about turning off the movie and just walking away for it. Unfortunately, I'm one of the few people you will meet who will sit through every single one of those movies and will often watch them, even if you're just like, let's see if he'll do it. The movie today that we're going to be covering this first time is going to be a little bit more well-known than some of the others we'll do down the line, and it's M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening from 2008. Had either one of you guys seen this movie before this week?
I had. It was a long time ago, but yeah, I think only just once. I think I actually went into theaters to see this movie.
And I had never seen this movie in my entire life until you guys made me watch it last night. So you guys have a lot to answer for, and I intend to make you answer for it over the course of this conversation.
And just keep in mind, this means that you can choose a far, far worse movie for us to watch down the line so that you can laugh at us.
That sounds fair.
But I think that's what this is all about, too, is we watch the bad movies, so no one else ever has to. Because we can take this movie and then jettison it into the Phantom Zone. And
exactly.
No one ever has to see it again, because it's gone.
That's the whole, basically, I guess the whole reason we're doing this is because there's movies that cause you such pain that you just want to shoot off into the far, far reaches of space so they can't hurt anyone for the future of mankind. So we're trying to gather up those. And this is our first one. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, either stop right now and go watch it. If you're smart,
or
don't. Yeah. Just stick with us. We are going to spoil all of it because it's the safest thing to do, just to basically serve as a warning. And if you're foolish enough, then you can watch it afterwards. The synopsis is incredibly, incredibly short from IMDb. It simply just says a science teacher, his wife, and a young girl struggle to survive a plague that causes those infected to commit suicide.
Were we supposed to stop here?
What's going on? You can't just leave us here.
Sir, we lost contact.
With whom?
Everyone.
There appears to be an event happening. It's some kind of attack. The first stage is loss of speech.
Claire. Claire?
The second stage is physical disorientation. The third stage is fatal.
Yeah, that's it's pretty simple, but I guess that covers it. That is what the movie is about.
Would you agree, Matt?
I mean, it's not a plague, but sure.
Okay, then we're done. We'll just end the show right there. That's all anybody needs to know. We don't have to talk about it or cry as we start to. This movie was interesting because of the fact that it starts with a weird prologue and, of course, then ends with a weird epilogue. And they've got the timestamp and everything as the movie goes on, and so they really want you to know, hey, it's Central Park and it's 8:59 a.m.
As if
on
that's
a Wednesday.
integral to understanding the movie, is that you know exactly what time it is.
It is, and the shots of Central Park, the only way that you can really tell it's Central Park is they've got that famous row of benches in the middle of underneath the trees, and that's it. And I think they could have easily done without that scene. I don't think it serves a ton of purpose except for to show that the movie's R-rated right off the bat.
Yeah, no, I think when I look at this movie as a whole, and we'll probably get into this later, but I think this movie was greenlit on the premise of there's a virus that makes people do really crazy self-mutilation, and someone caught on to that and said, yeah, that sounds like a cool movie, let's do that. And I think that's what this whole opening scene is for, is really just to sell on that premise.
Which we don't even get that much of it, all things considered.
No, we
like
don't.
if this were supposed to be like a gross out movie, it doesn't really accomplish that, because the camera doesn't really like to show the horrible violent things that are happening. So even that one possible redeeming feature is not present in the movie.
It's weird because it kind of both does and doesn't want to show. Like, there are scenes like when she stabs the hair tie thing into her neck that it loves showing that moment. Then there's the guy in the lion cage where it specifically cuts away from some of the gore. So
right.
It's like it's a rated R movie that's afraid to show some of its gore. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be a lot worse in anybody else's hands. Like they'd really kind of wallow in it and show you a lot more of it.
Well, the interesting thing about that R-rated element is the studio wanted him to do that. They asked M. Night Shyamalan if he'd be willing to do that, and he said that he was mostly known as a PG-13 guy, wanted to be able to get a bigger box office. Called them back basically 2 or 3 days later and said, you know what, I'll do it. Let's make it R. Let's make it in their face. And so the fact that they pulled back so many different times just feels odd.
Yeah, I mean, the whole movie feels odd. Let's be honest. Like, and we'll get into this as we go through the film, but every decision in this movie seemingly is the wrong decision. Every single one. And I think that's a great point that they start the movie with this prologue scene. I think that's the wrong decision to start with this. I think it's very interesting. We were talking about the timestamp that's on the thing. My favorite part is after that scene ends, there's another little block lettering thing that says 3 blocks away, and then shows that like 6 minutes have gone by, as if that's important at all. Like, it doesn't. We don't need that at all.
We just need to get Mark Wahlberg. That's what the movie posits, since it just has the abrupt cut straight to him talking to his classroom of kids with absolutely no teacher veracity to his speaking cadence.
Yeah, and I wrote down that scene in my notes because, like, the editing in this film is really bad, and I think that's a perfect example of it. We go from the scene where this construction worker is watching all his coworkers jump off the top of the building to their death, and he like looks up at this guy, and there's this like dear God moment or something where he's calling out to God, and it cuts immediately from that to this medium close up of Mark Wahlberg at the front of a classroom talking about honeybees. There's like no establishing shot showing that they're in a classroom. There's like no warm up to the scene. It's like hard cut right from that moment into this weird conversation about honeybees that has no impact on anything.
Yeah, I mean, is this the time to get into the dialogue?
Yeah, because
absolutely.
because this is where it starts.
This is where it starts making just the weirdest. You don't know if it's how it's being directed or how it's being blocked or what the acting decisions are or what the script is or all of the above, but it's just the most unnatural performances or just the most unnatural way of behaving that I've ever seen in a movie. Frankly, like any movie. I mean, even terrible movies, the actors don't come off as this like inhuman. Like there's I don't want to skip ahead, but there's a scene like immediately after this one where Mark Wahlberg and his friend John Leguizamo are walking, and every time they speak to each other, they stop before the other one speaks, turn and look at each other, and then one of them speaks, and then they start walking again, and then stop, and then they turn and look at each other, locking eyes, and then the other one speaks, and then they continue. Like it's no one ever does this. First of all, people don't actually lock eyes when they talk about normal things, and also they don't stop walking to talk. Like it's just not but it was obvious that like the camera was following them, and this needed to happen for the camera to be following them, and it was so important that the shot happened this way. I don't know, it was so weird that it completely distracted me. I've never experienced anything like this. It was amazing.
You know, and it's not even just how the dialogue is shot, it's how it's written. And like every single one of these characters, their introductory line is like kid level writing. Like Mark Wahlberg, like his first line is talking about honeybees because he's science guy, because he likes science. And then John Leguizamo comes in the classroom, and the first thing he talks about is how much he loves math and statistics. It's like, look, he's math guy. And then Zooey Deschanel's character, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but like one of her first line is, you know, I don't like to show my emotions. So she's a girl who can't show her emotions. And it's like they have the dialogue tell the defining trait of every single one of the characters, just in case you were confused as to what these characters are supposed to represent. It's really terrible.
Well,
And yet, I was just going to say that John Leguizamo's daughter, though, doesn't get an introduction line. She just has everyone say her name to her, but not asking her a question. They just say, "Hey, Jess, how's it going, Jess? It's nice to see you, Jess." And then that's just it.
Every one of these characters, like it's so weird, and like no scene in this movie feels normal. Like every scene feels just like a little bit off, whether it's the dialogue or the acting or the directing or the editing. Like everything feels just a little bit wrong, and it's so strange. Like going back to the whole first scene, like when he tells the high school student, your face is perfect, and there's that whole back and forth where he's talking about how perfect his face is, but he needs to know science because he needs to realize that his face is going to fade. And it's like, what the hell does this have to do with anything?
Should be more interested in science, Jake. You know why? Because your face is perfect.
It's essentially saying that Marky Mark, is a scientific anomaly and should be studied himself.
Yeah. But I want to talk, before we move on for this scene, he asks this kid why the honeybees are disappearing, what his opinion is, and the kid says, because it's an act of nature and we will never fully understand it. And as a scientist, Marky Mark's character says, yes, exactly. Yes. And Matt, you are a scientist. So tell me how that makes you feel.
Yes, that's how we treat everything, Scott. We don't attempt to ask questions or to answer questions. We just look at the majesty of nature and say, no, I mean, that's like the most ridiculous thing that's the most anti-science statement you could ever make, actually. It's like, well, yes, you investigate the phenomenon and understand why it happened. In fact, the whole premise of science is that there's no mystery that can't be unraveled. So
yeah,
it's like the most. I don't know. It's like Shyamalan has never talked to a scientist.
So you're saying that he's not a visionary and he's not an amazing screenwriter?
Okay.
I mean,
okay. Well, let's circle back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got the discussion with the honeybees, basically setting up the fact through not just the honeybees, because he does ask the students, why do you think the honeybees are vanishing? And they give off 4 or 5 different answers. And Mark Wahlberg goes, that's a great answer, but then this doesn't add up. This doesn't add up. Just shooting it down, which is basically setting you up for how this entire movie is going to go. You're going to have people continually posit possibly what might be going on in the world, and then somebody refuting it 2 seconds later saying, well, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't really think that's what's going on.
And tying into that, we never find out why the honeybees are disappearing.
No.
It's apparently not important.
We'll never fully understand it.
And I mean, it's in that sense, it's obvious that Shyamalan like saw a newspaper clipping about the fact that the honeybees are disappearing in real life, and then had the idea for this movie, and then had to include the thing about the honeybees in the movie for some reason. I don't know, to make it more plausible, maybe.
Well, I mean, the movie, it's an environmentalist movie, so I can see, including the honeybees, like, there's scientific arguments out there that honeybees are disappearing, and it's because of changes. It's actually because of all the reasons why the kids in his class posited, but the movie wants to tell them they're all wrong for some reason. But yeah, it's just a weird, like, this is a weird scene, and it's only going to get weirder from here, is the crazy part.
Because it goes directly from him saying that, having the assistant vice principal come in, to which he crouches in between the kids and calls for the Dark Lord before he gets taken out of the room into the auditorium where all the teachers are assembled. And we get a really weird, like, 3 to 4 second cameo from Alan Ruck Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, as I guess the principal of the school, who just says, "I spoke with the head of schools. We're going to be letting out." Not the superintendent, the head of the
head
school.
of all schools. All schools head.
The god of schools is who told him, "Hey, we're going to be closing. We have no idea why. Something may or may not be going on."
And my favorite part of that scene is they're like, there was a terrorist attack in Central Park. And Marky Mark's character says, "Central Park?" Like, he's weirded out by the fact that there would be a terrorist attack there. It's New York City. It's one of the most popular parks in the world. I would absolutely believe there'd be a terrorist attack in Central Park. But the entire point of that line is to set up his train of thought later in the movie to where he starts to believe the plant part. But it's just another one of those throw-in lines. Like, it's just it's bad screenwriting.
Oh yeah, I mean, this whole scene is not necessary.
Yeah.
And this is maybe arguably the first of many, many scenes where it really should have been just written or conveyed in a completely different way, and the information was redundant and unnecessary.
And then we move from this scene to Leguizamo and Mark Wahlberg, which, that's funny, I can't remember any of these characters' names. I don't know about the rest of y'all. But we move to that awkward hall conversation that you were talking about earlier, Matt. And they have this conversation in front of the school, surrounded by kids, when John Leguizamo's character reveals that Mark Wahlberg's wife was crying the moments before their wedding, not because she was happy, but because she was regretting this already. So we're trying to establish Mark Wahlberg and Zooey Deschanel's failing marriage, but we do it by having another character we just met tell us something that we've never seen. And I think, Adrian, you said that there was a scene, the original scene at the beginning of the movie, that had those two characters actually fight, but they cut it.
Yes, yeah, and it was basically a bad sitcom. And the funny thing is, you can actually go on to YouTube and put in The Happening deleted scene, and you'll see two things pop up. You'll see the actual deleted scene itself, and then you'll see the deleted fight scene with a laugh track inserted into it. and it actually works if you watch it, because there's so many weird stutters and stops. And if you think throughout this movie that people are talking weird, go watch the scene, because it's weirder than anything that's in this movie. It's basically Tommy Wiseauian The Room level acting between Zooey Deschanel and Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, and I think that's, we've mentioned how terrible the dialogue is. The acting in this movie is awful, and the casting is awful. Mark Wahlberg is he's not a terrible actor. He's just an actor with a very limited range, and this character was not within his range at all. I think the same with Zooey Deschanel. Like, Zooey Deschanel plays a very, like, bubbly, like, happy personality type of person most of the time, and they've cast her in this character who, I guess she's supposed to be, like, depressed and miserable, but, like, just like her eyes and the way she acts never really sell that.
Yeah.
Well, she feels like she's existing in basically an entirely different movie, because everybody else has this weird stiltedness to them, and she feels like she's in basically a high school drama play, and she's Blanche Dubois. Basically, she's that heightened state of sad and depressed surrealism. She never exists on a normal spectrum. It's always cranked to 10 or 11, and she's about to cry in every scene.
Yeah, or just telling us she's about to cry, which is like at one point, I think in a scene close to where we're talking about anyway, she's acting like very mildly miffed, and then says, "I'm upset. I'm going to go sit on a different part of the train and cool off."
Because we probably won't sit together anyways.
Yeah.
Is what she says. It's because she magically knows. Because if you look in the background when that's happening, no one's going towards the train or anything. Everyone else is trying to find people from their family that they're going to get on these trains for. And of course, when we get this, you guys both on separate occasions while watching the movie mentioned to me the same line that happens basically directly after this, when John Leguizamo, turns out that his wife isn't able to meet up with them because she's out trying to get a birthday gift for their daughter. So she's in a different part of the city. And John Leguizamo gets off the phone with her, and he mentions that she's able to get on a bus, but says she's on a bus out of New Jersey. She's going to the town of Princeton, and just says it in a way that you're like, okay, why did you say it that way? You could have just said she's on a bus out of town. She'll meet up with us. But just says the town of Princeton, and it's not the only time that somebody decides to say the town of Princeton.
Yeah, it's like this dialogue. Nobody talks like this, and it's not like the type of like Sorkin-esque dialogue where nobody talks like this because nobody's this clever in a conversation. Nobody talks like this because people don't use phrases like this when they're talking to people. They don't refer to, like, no one says, "I'm going to the town of Dallas." Nobody does that.
I mean, especially not if it's just completely unrelated. If you're just like, yeah, sorry, I'm late, guys. My wife told me that she was on the phone with her mom. It's like, that's not.
I don't care.
Why did you tell us that?
I don't care.
Right.
Yeah, and you're right. This script is filled with all these little moments like that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All that to be said is they hop aboard a train and they're heading, I forget, they're heading to middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, I guess, because they've decided this is a terrorist attack and we need to get to the small cities.
Yes, well, they're trying to get somewhere big in between where I think John Leguizamo or his wife, it's one of their family members has a place that they're trying to get to that's just outside of New York. It doesn't get to the small town thing for a little bit, but when they're going out of town on the train, they have our first full establishing skyline shot of New York, and it's one of the dingiest, crappiest shots of New York City from afar. Like anytime somebody's shooting a movie in New York, they always have a big like stock footage shot of New York with the skyscrapers and everything to make it look fantastic and great. And here they've got it like 15, 20 feet away from a train tunnel, slightly tilted upwards, so you get to see maybe 4 or 5 skyscrapers, and then that's it. That's all you really see of New York City proper until they're gone.
Yeah.
But we go from this, and everybody's on the train, and even though several people have phones that are capable of showing video, everybody's getting calls to tell them, "Oh no, there's new stuff that's going on," and Zooey Deschanel, who's on a completely other side of the train, is talking to a guy from her work that she went on a date with, which is part of the dealing with the rift that she and Mark Wahlberg are having. And just to further the weird conversation and everything, all you hear her say at first on the phone is, "We ate tiramisu together." That was it. Like she pronounces tiramisu in a way that makes absolutely no sense unless it was like a 4-year-old child who was looking at it and trying to sound it out. And that's it. And just says, that was it. And then pauses for a second. She goes, "Wait, what? What happened where? Oh no." And then everyone else on the train magically is having the same conversation, I guess, with other people that they just had dessert with. And they're finding out that it's moved away from New York and it's spreading. And then we have an indeterminate amount of time that goes on from when everybody finds this to the train magically stopping in a small town. And they have to basically try to find their way and find out what they're going to do next. And everybody from this one train magically ends up at the same diner where they see how far it's that is starting to spread out, and that it may not be a terrorist attack, it may be something else. And they've got the really weird diner guy who's hugging the side of his TV and pointing at it to say, "This is where we are."
Yeah, right. It's like a map of basically the entire eastern United States, and he points vaguely sort of in the middle of it, and he's like, "And this is where we are." And
it's
yeah.
great.
Well, and so this whole, it's so weird, this whole thing, because so they get off the train and they're told that the reason the train's stopping is because the conductors have lost contact with them. And Mark Wahlberg, lost contact with who? And they're like, everyone. But there's TV still running. Like, this town that they're in hasn't been hit yet. So, and this is very clearly only affecting the eastern seaboard. So, who did they lose contact with, and why did the train stop, and why is any of this actually happening? Like, the movie, like, at some point seems like it wants to bend over backwards to explain everything to you, but then at the same time, it just glosses over things that I guarantee you in the writing room they were just like, people won't notice.
But I think there was a writing room, Scott. That's very generous of you.
It was M. Night Shyamalan and his producer that he was talking with, and his producer's like, "That's great, let's do it, let's go."
He wrote it in 3 hours.
Basically. Well, because they've got the diner scene where everybody's kind of huddled together, and even though we've heard from the Amtrak people that they've lost contact with everyone who's in the diner is calling people on their phones. There's a lady who's watching a video that she goes, "Oh, my nephew or son sent this to me." And it's a video that's on like a first generation iPhone that looks better than any video of a guy in a lion cage who's having his arms torn off. And the woman very monotonely goes, "Mother of God, what kind of terrorists are these?"
Well, that whole scene is so confusing to me because, first of all, it's not just the scene itself, it's the juxtaposition between emotional beats, right? You have this beautiful moment between, well, as beautiful as you can get in this movie, between Mark Wahlberg and the kid, where he's trying to make her feel better and he's showing her his mood ring and trying to make her smile and tell jokes. And you go right from that to this woman he's just sitting next to in the diner who goes like, "Hey, look at this." And it's like the worst line reading ever. And then they show this scene, where this lion rips this guy's arm off, and it's just like there's no sense of flow or like movement of tone from one part to the other. It's just like just shifts back and forth whenever it feels like it.
Yeah. I mean, I was just imagining like if you were sitting around at a bar like while 9/11 was happening or something, and you like turn to your neighbor who you don't know, and you're like, "Hey, I just got a really horrific video." And then you just like show it to them and you both quietly watch it together and neither of you really reacting. And then you just go like, "Oh, dear God." Like that's basically what that scene was.
The craziest part about this scene is in the original script, and they filmed it after they watched this video, they had another character look at another video on their phone of a piano recital, and something terrible happening there. So the original plan was to shoot a scene in which people watch 2 videos while sitting in a diner. How do you do that?
You do it by the way that he ends the scene, which he has everybody just kind of murmuring to each other after they've seen the footage on the news. And one guy stands up and says, "If we stay here, we are going to die here." Then he sits down. Another guy who's sitting right next to him stands up and says, "Whatever this is, it isn't occurring about 90 miles from here." And then everyone flees. And while everybody's fleeing, Mark Wahlberg, for some reason, is running from car to car, trying to find a way out of town. And no one's really stopping for him until this old, slightly beat up Jeep shows up with who I affectionately call them as the hot dog people.
The hot doggers. So yeah, this scene is crazy. Because first of all, hot dog guy is insane for no reason. And he's also one of the only characters that ends up being right in the film. But this scene is especially crazy to me because this is when John Leguizamo's character says, I have to go back and get my wife, take my daughter with you. I'm going to go with this other car because they're going towards the town of Princeton.
Of Princeton.
So he gives, and then like he's about to give the daughter to Zoe, and then he gets this really serious look on his face, and like, only take her hand if you mean it. And like there's this weird tension between these two characters that is just assumed that like we never see why or anything, but like that was like the most intense line reading ever, and like Zoe Deschanel's reaction to it is like one of like she's confused and kind of flabbergasted. And I really think that's just Zoe Deschanel reacting to the line reading in the scene. I don't know if it's her acting.
I don't know if anybody's really acting or if they're just reacting to things that other people are saying because they didn't fully read the script.
And that's amazing. Like, a lot of these line reads are so flat and so off that I refuse to believe on a professional movie set that was the best take. Like, there's no way. Like, there had to have been a better, like, the tiramisu line, like, it's a professional movie, they're spending millions of dollars on it. Someone on set is going to tell her how to pronounce tiramisu, and they're going to shoot the scene until they get a take of her saying the word right. But that's not the take they use. They use a take when she talks weirdly and isn't believable and is flat and pronounces a word wrong. It's crazy.
And then you directly follow up the craziness of his angry line reading with Mark Wahlberg saying, "Oh, well, there's a chance nothing's happened in Princeton yet. It's fine. It's okay." And John Leguizamo just stands there for a second. He goes, "Oh, you want to throw some numbers and percentages out to feel better, do you? Okay, we'll say there's a 62% chance that nothing has happened there." Right? Mark Wahlberg goes, "Yeah," and he goes, "Okay," and then runs off to.
Just in case you had forgotten that John Leguizamo's character trait is math guy. Just in case, if you had forgotten that, he's math guy, and the movie's going to remind you of that again in a few minutes. So, what order does it go in? Does John Leguizamo's death scene happen before hot dog monologue? Yeah. I think it does.
No. We have the hot dog guys first. We don't see John Leguizamo for maybe another 3-4 scenes or so.
Okay.
Because we go straight from the diner scene to them showing up at the greenhouse with the horribly photoshopped or placed in the background CGI silos with a bunch of smoke billowing in the background. Just so you're thinking, oh, maybe it's pollution based. Who knows? Maybe that's the reason why all this is going on. But it's never mentioned or anything, and we go straight into the guy showing them his nursery and checking on the plants, and him just casually being like, plants can give off chemicals if they're threatened.
Yeah, but he says this, he buries this line in the middle of a monologue about how good hot dogs are.
We're packing hot dogs for the road. Hot dogs get a bad rap. They got a cool shape, they got protein. You like hot dogs, right? By the way, I think I know what's causing this.
You do?
It's the plants. They can release chemicals. You like hot dogs, don't you?
And that is the reveal. It is the plants. There's no other twist to the movie. It is the plants doing this. This guy has told us now. None of our characters figured that out on their own. They were told by random hot dog man in the middle of his hot dog monologue. I almost don't know what to say because every single choice in this movie, every single choice is the wrong one. Yeah. Every single one.
I mean, stuff like this is interesting to me because the really weird, awkward tone things actually happen a lot in Shyamalan movies. It's just normally they fit like they're weird, but they're weird in an appropriate way. Like you're supposed to feel weird about this character at this point in time, or like at worst, it's just like yeah, I can tell this is supposed to kind of be like awkward humor, where like the character is supposed to feel awkward because of how weird this person is. But here, there's no like ironic distance at all. It's Mark Wahlberg just doesn't seem to know how to react to this man saying these things to him, and everyone's just kind of like looking at each other weirdly, and it's like I literally can't tell if the actors are confused or if the characters are confused. It's so it's so it's almost like I see what Shyamalan's trying to do. He's trying to do this thing that he always tries to do. It's just absolutely not working here because the whole movie is so poorly put together.
Well, he makes it worse too because with Mark Wahlberg being the de facto hero, even though he does very few heroic things in the course of the movie, they always have these giant, wide shots of Mark Wahlberg where he's placed directly center in the middle when people are talking at him, and he has this look on his face that's just, I'm confused as fuck and I have no idea what's happening to me. And it's basically half the shots in the movie is somebody talking to or asking Mark Wahlberg something while they have the shot of him, and it's just usually there's silence for a few seconds and you just see his nostrils flaring back and forth. Which does nothing for the movie whatsoever, but M. Night Shyamalan's like, this is the heart of everything in the movie.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, there are a lot of scenes, not just Mark Wahlberg, but other characters where the camera just holds for like 4 seconds longer than it needs to. You're just sitting there like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it cuts, and that actually happened, and I actually counted at least once because it's just like nothing was happening. There was no. Yeah, I don't know. How does that happen? Because that's an editing mistake. That's not even a directing mistake or a script mistake. It's certainly not a script mistake. It's an editing mistake. So somebody did that on purpose.
Well, and I think, in a competent movie with good actors, sometimes those extra hold beats allow you to the emotion to sink in. But the problem is the characters have the exact same expression on their face throughout the entire extended hold. So it is really pointless. It is not doing anything. It is just you're staring at a person hold the same face for 5 seconds longer than they need to.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. That bears saying because if you're watching the actor like absorb something or go through some inner struggle, that's completely different from just like consternation.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Mark Wahlberg has one look on his face throughout this entire movie, and it's just confused surprise. And he has that same reaction to when he's watching people kill themselves, to when he's finding out that his wife had dessert with another man. Which can we talk about the dessert reveal? The movie is
we're almost to it.
Oh, is it coming?
Because we do have to. Yeah, it's basically directly after the next scene because directly once we go from the nursery, the plant nursery people, we end up jumping to John Leguizamo in the Jeep as he looks out the right side of the window and sees a sign that says "Welcome to the town of Princeton."
I missed that. That's amazing.
That's exactly what the sign says, and it's a really small rinky-dink sign for someplace that's as well known as Princeton.
Yeah, Princeton's a huge town.
And it's basically nothing, and they're just in the middle. When they first get into Princeton, it's the middle of suburbia, and as they're driving along, they see all these all this gardening equipment that's on the side of the road, and then they look up, and then there's all these gardeners who have hung themselves, but they have hung themselves in a way that's not directly completely around their neck. It's like awkwardly also tied around their arm, and somehow apparently they've tied themselves to each of the strongest branches on each of the trees in town, because most of the guys look like they weigh like 250 pounds, and there's no way that the rinky-dink little branches that they're attached to is going to hold everybody up.
Well, and I think that reveals a problem with the whole central conceit of this film, which is this virus or toxin that makes you kill yourself. I think it sounds really fun on paper as something that would be fun to see or watch, but in execution, it doesn't make any sense because they want to construct these elaborate like suicide scenes for these characters, but none of it matches. Like, in some scene, like the girl's reaction is just to beat her head on the wall and on a window until she dies. And with these guys, they got off of their lawn mowing equipment. They pulled out a hose. They climbed up a tree. They tied the hose to the tree, and then they jumped off in this really complicated method of killing themselves, where other people are just like walking into things or like. So none of this really makes sense. It doesn't track across the different incidents. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, and I mean, like one might be tempted to say that that's nitpicky, but like in a movie like this, where it's sort of almost a brand, like an offshoot of like a zombie movie or whatever, it is really important to be consistent with the mechanics of the conceit. And as you say, there's no consistency here. It's just like whatever like idea they came up with for like, and then some of them they're gonna drive down the street. There's gonna be bodies hanging from the trees. That's a cool shot. Just put that in there, without any thought to like whether that was like plausible within the world that they had created.
Yeah.
And then the thing is that it's about to get worse and even more convoluted, because we jump back to Mark Wahlberg and Zooey Deschanel with the hot dog people driving down the road, and Mr. Hot Dog says, "Hey, look, there's some bodies in the road. I think they're animals." And so they stop the car, and Mark Wahlberg's like, I don't know, we should take a look at it. So they grab binoculars and find out that there's dead bodies up ahead. So they decide to reverse the Jeep, drive a couple blocks down the road, and they come across an army vehicle that's pulling up. A guy gets out and says, "Oh no, there's stuff coming back that way." You have several people come from basically every direction and saying that they're running into the dead bodies in areas that have been affected within several miles. So you get a whole bunch of people together to try to figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that scene real quick, because I think that scene could have been really cool if it had been competently directed in any way, shape, or form. I think there's this really cool image of people coming from 5 different directions, and the realization that every single direction they came from, the bad thing has happened, so they're literally just stuck where they are. And that could have been really cool if it was handled in any kind of competent way. But it's completely bumbled, and you have the reveal be like different people go to talk to different people, and then just 4 characters get together and say, "Yeah, there's nowhere to go." And then they make this really awkward cut, and then they're walking through a field.
I agree, that may be the worst scene in the movie, but part of it is the National Guard or whatever character who just behaves in a completely inhuman fashion.
Yes,
and is like running back, and it's just a very jarring and weird and fake looking scene.
And it's frustrating because I really like.
He's Gomer Pyle, basically.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
he is.
Yeah, it's just a stereotype.
I could really see that, like, in my head, the way I would direct that scene. Not that I'm better than M. Night Shyamalan. I'm not, but the way I would direct that scene, you could make it really cool and emotionally impactful, and they chose not to.
Well, not only that, but like half of the dialogue. I know we keep on going back to the dialogue, but this is a perfect scene where no one has a natural speaking cadence in the entire film. And when they're going and looking at the map, Mark Wahlberg's taking a look at it with the National Guard guy and says, "Whatever's happening is happening to smaller and smaller places." And in my mind, I was like, "And it's killing my patience more and more." And then directly after, they're talking about what they need to do, and they're like, "Oh, it looks like these areas haven't been affected, because if we split up, we might stand more of a chance by scouting everywhere else." So the National Guard guy stands up, gives a really weird speech for no reason, but finishes it by saying, "We need to stay in groups. We need to stay together." And you're like, well, those are 2 completely different things. You either stay in a group or you stay together.
So they do both. Problem
exactly. We're going to split up together. And they go off into the 2 groups. And that's when we get to the dessert reveal.
Yeah. So God, it's so, I just, this is a rated R movie, but I feel like Shyamalan is pulling punches with this. Like, it's like he doesn't want to be mean. He wants their problem to be so juvenile. Like, in any other movie, she cheated on him. In any other movie, she slept with this guy, or she got really close to sleeping with this guy. But in this movie, she just had tiramisu with him, and she felt immediately bad about it afterwards, and felt so guilty that she had to tell him. Like, that's so weird. Why?
I mean, I keep making these like extremely ungenerous stabs at the writing, but like I really feel like this is either like something that Shyamalan like heard happen to his friend, or this is something his wife did, and he was like, "Oh, this was so painful for me. I need to work through this trauma. I need to work through the pain. I need to use this in my art." and he like, and maybe in real life his wife actually had, you know,
German chocolate cake.
German chocolate. Yes, thank you. I was really struggling there.
They got to change it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, because otherwise his wife would know, you know, that he was, you know,
she'd never pick up on the tiramisu line.
Never figure this out, but and he probably was a huge asshole about it in real life. So in the movie, he has Mark Wahlberg just like deal with it really gracefully. This is my serious interpretation, by the way. I'm not just like riffing. I'm like, this is so bad that like I really believe that he just is like cobbling this stuff together from stuff that he is like seeing in the news and in his life. It has no polish or indication that he has like written a first draft and then thought about it and then like processed the ideas further. This is pretty much a first draft that we're seeing. Well, which means it's just raw stuff from Shyamalan.
Yeah.
Steve and stuff that's deep down inside, especially because we go basically not more than 30 seconds after this and we jump back to the other group with the private and the hot dog people who are walking in their direction. And then we get the famous wind whistling cue, as I like to call it, which signals to you that something is going to happen. When I was watching this movie, it was late at night and I had to put on the subtitles so I didn't wake anybody else up on. And I noticed that within the first like 30, 45 seconds of the movie, the subtitle said wind whistling several times. And I'm like, oh, I have to keep track of this. And it turns out that there are 21 different instances of the wind whistling cue that appears on screen. That does not include the 5 or 6 different times that it says wind howling or screeching as well. So not only do we have plants possibly actually letting people know, hey, watch out, we're going to get you. And we have a shot of the private stopping in his tracks and starting to walk backwards, which is one of the telltale signs apparently that everybody knows. And we get a close-up shot of him starting to unlatch his holster, cut to the hot dog people getting ready to hold each other's hands, and then we hear a gunshot. So then we cut back wonderfully to the group of Mark Wahlberg's group, and once again the dialogue completely shines because one of the people in the group goes, "Oh no," and then Mark Wahlberg goes, "Is it the toxin? Is it the toxin that's affecting them?"
Jesus. Oh no.
Oh, I don't know.
The toxin? The toxin is affecting them?
Are those people killing themselves?
You were with it, Private. What do we do?
We need to do something.
Just let me think.
They're dying.
I need a second. They released it? We're not near the road.
We can't just stand here as uninvolved observers.
I need a second, okay? Just give me a second.
We're not gonna be one of those assholes on the news who watches a crime happen and not do something. We're not assholes.
Just a second.
There were children in that room. Elliot, please tell us what to do.
I need a second, okay? Why can't anybody give me a goddamn second?
The scene basically gets better and alternatively worse simultaneously because it's probably my favorite scene in the movie because it's Mark Wahlberg being the worst hero of all time. You're hearing in the distance as the entire scene goes on gunshots, very slow gunshots, and the people in Mark Wahlberg's group are saying, "Oh, what do we do? What should we do?
Tell us what to do.
We need." Exactly. And the whole time Mark Wahlberg goes, I need a second. I need a second. Just give me a second. I need a second. Why won't somebody give me a goddamn second? And then it stops, zoom in close on his face, and he goes, "All right, be scientific, douchebag." That's the movie. That's the written scene. That's the scene that M. Night Shyamalan decided this is exactly what my hero is going
And this
to
is
say.
why he's a scientist. So in this moment, he can apply the scientific method and reason that it attacks people in big groups. So the smaller group you're in, the safer you are. And that's literally the only reason he's a scientist, because it's the only quote unquote science he does in the entire film.
And this is the kind of thing that makes me wonder if Shyamalan is doing some of these things on purpose. Is after he comes to his conclusion, the camera's been zoomed in on his face this whole time as he's been talking to himself. The camera like snaps away and shows that all the other people who had been surrounding him and asking him what to do have just wandered off now.
Yes.
They're just standing, and they turn around in like mild surprise that he's talking again, as if it's been several minutes.
Well, especially his whole response to them is after he deduces everything and what needs to be done. He goes, we need to split off into smaller and smaller groups. It was the size of the groups that got them, I think. and then says one of my favorite lines where he looks at everybody and says, "Let's just stay ahead of the wind."
Which is really easy to do in this movie.
Isn't there then a wind chase scene after that in which they specifically don't stay ahead of the wind? Like the wind catches up to them?
They start to run, and I guess you're supposed to sense that they see the other group ends up getting attacked / infected, because in the middle of them running, they just kind of all of a sudden freeze in place and are like, maybe the wind is like a T-Rex, and if we stand here very, very still and quiet, it won't notice us.
I mean, you have to, like, this is a film in which the bad guy is an invisible virus secreted by the grass. So, practically, how do you shoot that and make it thrilling and intense? I don't think you can, and that's why, this is something that maybe sounded good on paper, but
okay, this is what I would do, since you asked. I would have it be like specific kinds of trees that the movie sort of strongly hints are the culprits, and then you actually shoot those particular trees with some amount of ominousness, because you can totally, Poltergeist, you can totally make a tree seem terrifying with very simple like camera decisions and lighting decisions. But this movie, the whole movie, there are just plants and greenery in every shot. And it's always just like cheerfully green plants and trees just kind of in the background. There's never any like filmic attempt to make the plants seem foreboding at all.
They try once. And it's actually my favorite scene of the movie.
Remind me.
This is when they go to the house with the old couple in it that end up killing 2 children casually. And the little girl is swinging on the tree swing. And there's this weird like overhead shot when it's like looking at where the tree swing like bolts go through the limb of the tree, and like the limb's creaking, and it's trying to make this tree look ominous. It fails spectacularly. It's not a scary shot at all, but it's really trying. And then there's this really weird line where Zooey Deschanel says, "What kind of tree is this?" And Marky Mark is like, "I think it's a maple." And then that's just the end of that conversation.
Yeah. The tree doesn't do anything.
I don't know what that had to do with anything that was going on, but it really I saw an attempt to like paint this tree ominous in that scene.
Yeah,
you're right.
He did that's exactly what M. Night Shyamalan wanted to do, because the whole beginning of the making of special feature on the DVD for the movie. Yes, I went DVD and not Blu-ray because it was free from the library, and this wasn't something I was going to spend money on. I'm sorry that you guys probably did.
I don't think high definition would have saved this movie.
No, but at the beginning of the making of, they do have him setting up that crane shot of the tree, and he's watching on the monitor, and he goes, "Ooh, that looks scary." And the one of the like EPs who's next to him is like, "Or something like that." And it fits it. It shows that M. Night Shyamalan was completely set in how he believed things to be, but just no one else was really buying into it.
How could this happen? Because, like, if let's say you just watched The Sixth Sense for the first time, and someone's like, "Hey, do you think this director, if he wanted to, would be able to depict like a tree in a foreboding way, in a frightening way?" Or at least in a way that made you a little tiny bit creeped out. I'm sure that I would be like, "Oh, of course." I mean, he this is his forte. Why is he so horrible here?
I have a theory about this, and I don't know if we want to do it now. We can do it at the end. I don't know.
Might save it at the end.
Yeah, I have a whole theory about this, and I think I'm going to convince you. So
okay,
we've touched upon their brilliant, or I guess shocking, decision that happens when they get to the house of the old people. But directly before that, when they break off into the group and they survive the wind, they go to a model home so that we can have a nice little act break, I guess, and people can ruminate again on what they think is going on. And Mark Wahlberg talks to a plant, asking if they can survive and not be killed, and then realizes that it's plastic. But they go to the next room, and one of the kids, or Zoe Deschanel, says, do you think it could be the plants? And Mark Wahlberg just goes, I don't know. And then he goes into the next room, and what's his name? Spencer Breslin? Is that the kid's name?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
It's something Breslin. He was in the what's it called, the Santa Claus movies. But he's sitting at a table and he goes, "I don't think it's nature." And Mark Wahlberg automatically goes, "It may not be. There could be another scientific explanation. I don't know." And so it's just like constantly throughout the movie, he's like, "I don't know. It's plants. I don't know. It's something. It could be anything."
Can we that scene when he sits down at the dinner table and is talking to the kid, and he picks up the fake wine glass, and is holding it as if it's a real wine glass, and he's about to take a drink of it? Oh my god! This movie.
It shows that he just wanted the scene to be done so he could go back to his trailer and just drown himself in something.
It's so hilarious. It's like, what? Like, in a smarter movie, the model home is making a comment on something. You know, like, this is a movie about environmentalism. You could make a comment on consumerism with the model home and how everything is fake and staged. But of course, the movie doesn't really do that. It just uses it for talking to a fake tree joke, and then a scene where he picks up a wine glass as if it's a real wine glass while chatting with the little kid.
Yeah, and you know what occurred to me during this scene, even though, you know, I didn't know if they survived the movie or not, but I was like, well, this movie's an environmentalist movie and it's trying to make us be more respectful, but they're safe here. So in real life, what would happen if this event happened is we would just pave over the entire earth and kill all the plants. Because then we wouldn't have to worry about this again. Good job, movie.
Yeah, that's true. So, and after this scene is when they move to the child murder, right?
Yes, yeah, because they're running away from the model home, and they have the sign that shows that they're building like 1,300 homes. You deserve this place, and they have a whole bunch of people who are running up. Mark Wahlberg goes, "Go, run over the hill," and then stops just so you can watch all these group of people being murdered
by a lawnmower.
Yes, that the guy starts, watches drive off, and then walks back into its path, lays down so that he can be killed by it.
Yeah, and this is another weird, like, borderline rated R thing where they actually do show it run over him, and you're like, as you're preparing to see it, you're like, oh, it's gonna be grody, but then like there's almost no blood. It just goes over him. And you can tell because he's like shaking that it's, you know, destroying his body.
Yeah.
But there's not like an outsized spray of gore, and you don't like see his mangled body afterwards. So it's like that was really weirdly restrained when this is supposed to be your whole like draw.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I want to see this stuff. Like I'm not that kind of moviegoer, but I'm just like noting, like, why would you make a movie like this and then not sort of at least there's more horrible gore in The Sixth Sense than there is in this movie.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it's more affecting in that movie too.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay, so they go to a house where Mark Wahlberg's trying to be really nice and calm to try to find out if they can come inside and get some food for the little girl. And Spencer Breslin is trying to knock in the door, and the guy inside's like, "Oh, you're probably with the terrorists." And Mark Wahlberg's like, "No, we're normal people." So he decides that he's going to start singing a song, and then says, "See, we're normal. Us breaking out randomly into song. That's totally normal."
That's how you demonstrate being normal, is you just break into song. Yeah,
and then Spencer Breslin keeps kicking the door, which causes him to be shot in the chest, and then causes a gun to comically be stuck through a slit in a window, like it's out of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yeah, and then blow off the back of the kid's head so they can cry for 2 seconds, and then the guy goes, "I'm giving you to the count of 3 to get off my property." You just killed 2 people. Why are you now being reasonable?
Right.
So our main characters can get away.
Exactly. So they can go see an even crazier person.
So here's you've just gone up to a house that appeared to be abandoned, and 2 of you got shot to death. So the next thing you do is walk up to another abandoned house.
Exactly,
because this one looks smart play.
Well, this one looks more abandony.
Yeah, so it'll probably be safer.
Yeah, but it's not. But then when we discover that its inhabitant is a creepy, crazy person, we're like, "Oh, I'm all in on this. Let's go."
This is the point in the script where he was like, "Oh crap, nothing's happened for a while. I need to throw something crazy in. So we're just gonna have a crazy old lady."
Yes, and this part of the movie is what I call the visit part 1. Because he seems to be like all of the effective creepy things that happen in the visit. There's like a much less effective mirror of that in this part of the movie, which actually stretches for quite some time. It's a lot of minutes. I didn't time it.
20, it's about 25 minutes, because even M. Night Shyamalan in the special features gets excited about it, and he's like, and then we take this fantastic turn where the last 25 minutes becomes its own little movie. And you're like, no, that's not what you do in the third act of a film.
I mean, this part is actually the most interesting part of the movie, like, because here you actually have some conflict, because there's a crazy woman, and like you could even ignore the whole element of like there's plant toxins. It's just like you have to deal with the fact that you're living with this crazy woman who switches between being lucid and being obviously like paranoid, and that's intrinsically dramatic. Like, but I'm glad he made a different movie about that actually.
but in true The Happening form, it doesn't actually lead to anything.
Right.
No. It has meaning.
There's the famous scene that I think of every time I think of this movie is Mark Wahlberg's "What? No." and so that scene, and I had forgotten what happens in that scene, where it's literally 30 seconds long, where he sees her at the end of the hallway, she says some crazy shit, he acts bad, and then the scene just ends.
I hear you whispering. Planning on stealing something?
No, ma'am, we're not.
Plan on murdering me in my sleep?
What? No.
They seem like they were building up to something there, but it doesn't. And then it's morning again. And then there's another creepy scene where there's a doll on her bed and she starts yelling at him. And again, the conflict... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, she stands there and she goes, I hear you whispering. I know you're planning to steal my things. You're planning to kill me in the middle of the night. And then just turns and walks back into her room.
So that was that.
Yeah, glad we sorted that out.
Exactly. This is the lady that, in some weird, I guess, is supposed to be comical, but then actually has no connection whatsoever, has Zooey Deschanel, like, a minute before goes, there's something exorcisty about her.
But again, like, this is the problem with this movie, is there is no conflict, because there's this conflict presented between them and this woman, and the movie solves the conflict for our main characters by just having her go outside and have the toxin affect her, and she dies. And that's
Wait, you mean join up with her?
Oh yeah, sorry. They work together because then the woman walks back to the house and breaks the window so the toxin can get into the house because they're on the same team now.
But that only comes after the great moment where Mark Wahlberg walks outside and he's like, "Mrs. Jones, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Jones. Can we just talk about this? You see, I'm a teacher." And then Mrs. Jones proceeds to start walking backwards, and Mark Wahlberg goes, "I've seen this shit too many times," and goes in and closes the door. And then the wind is like, "Oh, now for whatever reason, we're going to have people start to do our bidding, and we really want to get you, even though we let you survive 20 minutes earlier."
So she's not going to pick up any of the sharp instruments that were probably in the garden and do anything or do something elaborate like hang herself. She's going to walk up to the house and beat her head on it until she breaks the glass so the wind can get in.
And then not actually kill herself with the broken glass, even though that's what any of the other people in the previous scenes would have done.
Yeah.
Did we see what happened to her? Because that's all I remember in the movie is and I shook my head and closed my eyes for 2 seconds after she throws herself through the third window with her head. So she could just be out there alive, bleeding for all we know.
It's very possible.
I mean, I'm hoping, or I mean, it would have been awesome, actually, I should say, if like Zooey Deschanel and Marky like meet up and embrace, and then she like lunges out of the bushes beside them. And is still alive. And
there's an interpretation of this movie that everyone that has to be around Mark Wahlberg for any amount of time just ends up killing themselves because they can't stand him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, so that happens. She's dead. So then the girls are out in the slave shed.
Yes. Yeah. So that is introduced because she mentions that she has a room in back. Mrs. Jones says, "We used to hide people from slave chasers back there." First of all, this movie takes place in 2008. This woman's maybe
we used to.
Yeah, we used to. She's like 60 years old, and I'm like, at what point were you alive where slavery was a big thing?
It's also
in the Northeast.
It's also a weird moment to try to make a character sympathetic that you're clearly trying to show is just a crazy nut job that you're supposed to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And then she slaps a child
yes.
out of nowhere very forcibly and says, "Don't touch things that aren't yours." And then, while casually talking, rather lucid, 20 seconds later, gives the child the cookie.
Yeah, I mean that was like the one element of the movie where I was like, oh, okay, you're doing a thing here. Like you're correctly portraying this as a very unstable, crazy woman who we should be scared of in kind of an interesting way, not just like, oh, she's violent and horrible, but she's like psychotic and delusional and horrible. I don't know. I'm not defending it per se, but
okay.
I saw what they were going for here, and
then
weird.
So then the two characters are caught out in the shed, and he's caught in the house. But luckily, they have a pipe that goes between the two that they can talk to each other through, as if they were both in the same room. It's very
a speaking
convenient.
tube.
Yeah, there you go. It's the handy slave hiding speaking tube. So they have their final dramatic conversation, and it's at this moment that I realized, oh, this is a movie about their relationship. Because it really wasn't that up until this point. But suddenly, the dramatic finale of this movie is about them patching their relationship up. Which is not established, really, other than they had a fight, and she had dessert, and then he told a really weird drugstore story, which we really didn't even bring up.
I think he made it up, right?
Yeah, he completely made it up.
He was trying to be funny or something.
He was trying to show her that he was over it by telling a weird story about how he almost bought cough medicine from
cough
a
syrup, and how he totally could have asked out the girl behind the counter.
If we're gonna die, I want you to know something. I was in a pharmacy a while ago. There was a really good-looking pharmacist behind the counter. Really good-looking. I went up and I asked her where the cough syrup was. I didn't even have a cough. And I almost bought it. And I'm talking about a completely superfluous bottle of cough syrup. That's like $6.
Are you joking?
on this is like a relationship argument on the order of like wanting to eat at different restaurants and being upset about it.
Yeah.
Like this is not a fodder for making a movie type drama.
But that's an M. Night Shyamalan thing, basically. And I was thinking about it when they got to the scene, and of course, while it's going on and everything, Mark Wahlberg wants to be with her, so they start walking out into the middle of the field to each other, and then end up surviving. And the reason that we know they survive is because we see them go sit together, and over voiceover, we hear Mark Wahlberg say, "The event must have ended before we went out there."
Yeah.
But what was interesting when watching this is, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is M. Night Shyamalan's big trope. The majority of his movies are about relationships between people that are broken or fragile in one way or another. And it's only through large cosmic events of a whole bunch of people dying, or people close to the main characters dying, that two people can be like, you know what, things aren't too bad.
But if so, they need to establish that early on. And we talked about how there was the scene opened on the fight between them, and as terrible as that fight is, I think it was necessary to establish that this is what the movie is about. It is about these two people. And you can have the background being this terrible, tragic event. That's also every other kind of disaster movie does the same thing. But if you're going to center this film on these two people, you need to center the film on these two people. And it doesn't do that.
I mean, my God, like I'm almost overwhelmed with like remembering how well they situate us with Mel Gibson's tension with his children because their mother died, and then like his brother is there, and there's all this interesting stuff going on there, or Sign's kid and his mom, and how she's like sort of resentful and trying her best, and like, God, there's like so much layering and complexity to these characters that in the other movies. In this one, it's like flatline, complete, and like you say, he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to do like, okay, these people are struggling, and they have something between them that needs to be aired and resolved. And this movie is supposedly about that, but it just completely fails. And I want to hear Scott's theory. I know we're not quite there yet, but
I think we're pretty much there.
We can. Before we get to that, because we've been talking about not sure exactly what he's trying to do or why he's making these decisions, M. Night Shyamalan famously, both in several of the special features on the DVD as well as an interview with CNN, said that he wanted to make the biggest, best B movie ever made. And then the CNN reporter said, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, zombies and monsters and stuff. And you can kind of see that in a way, but then at the same time, in another special feature, you have the executive producer who's helped produce all of M. Night Shyamalan's movies and worked very closely with him, said that when M. Night was selling him on the idea of the film, that he said, oh yeah, I want to make a big B movie like those 70 paranoia thrillers. And you're like, those are two completely different type of films. So you're basically admitting that you don't know exactly what the tone or idea of this film was to begin with.
Yeah. So and here's my central argument. I have been a M. Night Shyamalan defender for as long as I can remember. I think he's gotten generally a bad rap. I think he's made more good movies than he's made bad movies. There was just when you start off and your first movie is your masterpiece, anything that doesn't live up to that expectation is going to disappoint people. I think that this movie was very deliberately made this way. I think that, you look at a director who we know in Matt, you're exactly right, in Sixth Sense, in Signs, who can tell complex stories about characters, who can use things like an alien invasion as a metaphor, where it's really a movie about a man trying to re-find his faith. I think a director like that is way too competent to make every single wrong choice. And that is the truth here. In The Happening, every choice is wrong. Every single one. And that leads me to believe that it had to have been intentional. He set out to make a very specific B kind of movie. So he wanted to check all the B movie boxes: bad acting, hokey story, hokey dialogue, weird, uncomfortable moments that don't make a lot of sense, sloppy editing, sloppy directing. I just believe that this was all done intentionally.
Yeah. I mean, either he just happened to hire all the worst people. No, I mean it's really not possible, because we know some of these actors are good. So he must have given them instruction to be this bad.
Well, yeah, it's not only did he direct badness or use bad takes, but he hired actors that he had to have known would not be good in the roles he's casting them for. I mean, like, you don't look at Mark Wahlberg and say, compassionate science school, high school teacher. Like, that's just not what he is.
Yeah, and like you just said, he knows how to write. Like, he's really good at story, in my opinion, and he's really good at dialogue. Like, in his other movies, I've never been like, this is just painfully unrealistic. Like, maybe some, like in certain cases, like The Village, they speak in a weird way, but there's an excuse, which is that they live in this like fake, Puritan village. But this movie, the dialogue is horrible. It's like it's written by a different person, but it is him, right?
Yeah.
So he must have done it on purpose in some way. You're exactly right.
And I hesitate to throw out this excuse a lot, because I think it's very easy on movies to say, "Oh, well, this movie was bad because it was trying to be bad." I think that's an overused excuse a lot of the times. But I genuinely feel like that's what happened here, because that's what is happening. Get it? Because that's the title.
Currently happening.
Then that means that I have to be a devil's advocate, because I feel the opposite, basically. This is the start, or this is in the middle, I guess, to me, of a run of bad movies for him. He did have, of course, Sixth Sense is great. I'm not going to discount it at all. There's lots of good in Unbreakable. Signs is about 80 to 90% of a great film. The weakness of the aliens is still something that sticks with me, because it just seems like he wrote himself into a hole with everything else. Everything before it is great, but then that reveal seems kind of cheesy and weird. The Village is a bad Twilight Zone episode. The Lady in the Water is really where things start to go off the wheels, and is M. Night Shyamalan starting to lash out and act back and trying to fire back at the critics and saying, "No, I'm a good writer and director. You just don't get what I'm trying to do." And he has a character in that film that's him bashing on critics, saying critics are idiots. They don't know how to make movies. They know nothing about filmmaking whatsoever. This is what I think of you. And then you jump straight into The Happening as the next movie that he makes. Directly after The Happening is The Last Airbender. And he's going on this tear. And what I think happens to him is that he started out like lots of up-and-coming filmmakers do, but he had more success than them right off the bat with having The Sixth Sense, with then having more people turn out for Unbreakable, even if they didn't really like it. And then Signs getting him lots of critical acclaim, that he bought into the hype that everybody was putting on him, and he kind of got absorbed by his ego as you start to get into those movies. And The Happening very much, I feel, is like that ego taking over and him being fully absorbed and thinking that these are great ideas, when in fact they are not great and bad and often terrible ideas. And there's nothing more telling than the very last credit you have in the opening titles is written, produced, and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, which means that he's in charge of everything. Everything was in his control. It basically was a passion project for him. And lots of times when you have those passion projects and you have no one kind of as a buffer, whether it be a producer or a co-writer or somebody directing your script, you don't really have anybody telling you maybe this isn't really a good idea. And if all you're surrounded by are yes men, basically, may come out and take hold. And I think that's evident on the screen in this movie, and then just gets taken to an even larger degree once you get into The Last Airbender.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with you. I do agree that he was a victim of his own success, that it probably got to his head on some level. But I really just think that if that were the case, if that he just got full control of this movie and it turns out he didn't actually know what he was doing the entire time, it just seems so unlikely to me. Like, I could see it being like just a poorly conceived idea and it just not executing well on it. But it's more than just a bad idea. It's bad everything. It's everything. It's bad casting, bad acting, bad directing, bad editing, bad story, bad dialogue. Like every piece of this movie is awful.
Yeah,
just terrible. And it just like I understand, like he's a director that, you know, your first movie you have a certain amount of control, but you don't have complete control. So maybe he was very well helped out by ADs and by his editor. But I just think, like, I've seen what he can do with the camera. I've seen the intensity of the way he shot stuff in Sixth Sense, and that's a director to me that knows what he's doing. And I just don't see how you can make this many mistakes unless you were on some level trying to do it.
Yeah, Adrian, I mean, I think you're right that is happening, because, like, I think in episode 36, Deconstructing Blomkamp, Scott and I discussed how, like, a similar thing we think happened to Neil Blomkamp, where he had all this time, you know, or in this case, Shyamalan had all this time to, like, work on the Sixth Sense kind of in his head, and like, so it was great. And then maybe the next movie comes around and they're like, okay, do that again. And he manages to pull out Unbreakable, and it's not quite as good. And then kind of with each successive attempt, he gets better at his craft because of experience, but also the pressure and the, like, expectation that he can just do this really quickly keeps mounting, and it's kind of unrealistic. And it ends up, I agree, kind of by Lady in the Water, it kind of feels like he's just kind of threw some crap together made out of bedtime stories that he told his kids, and kind of figured he was just going to, like, ride on that, and it doesn't really work out. But while I agree that all of that is happening to Shyamalan's career, I also agree with Scott that this particular movie, like, I don't know, I don't think you forget how to, like, place a camera. I don't think you just forget that. I don't know. I've never done any of this film stuff myself, but.
Well, I would be very interested to see, and I wish I looked that up, who edited this film, and if it was the same editor he had worked with before, or if this was a new guy he brought on. And you know, maybe it is very possible that he just didn't have this kind of control before, and now he could order the editor around more than he could in the past, and he said, yeah, hold this shot for an extra 5 seconds.
Right.
Use this take, even though it's clearly the worst one. I don't know, but I don't know. Like, I will always be a Shyamalan defender. I'm not going to say this is a good movie. It's not. Avatar, Last Airbender, or whatever, is a terrible, terrible movie. But I really I feel bad for the guy. I feel bad that he had to produce and pay for his own movie to get The Visit made, because no one wants to make his movies anymore. And I think he's a talented filmmaker, and that kind of bums me out.
I have the editor answer.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, the editor was Conrad Buff. It was the first one that he worked on with him. He ended up working on Last Airbender next. But to go over some of the movies that he's done in his career, he did Spaceballs, The Abyss, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, True Lies, Species, Dante's Peak, Titanic, Mystery Men, Training Day, Harsh Times, and then Shooter before doing this.
Okay.
So basically he has no idea what he's doing. He's just an amateur.
Yeah.
See that I don't know. I think both of our points are valid here. I really do. And I'm not gonna just flat out say that you're wrong. I think we're both agreeing that this is a terrible movie. This is an absolutely awful movie in every conceivable way. Like when you picked this movie, I was like, oh yeah, this is that one where it's stupid because it's tree poison, but it's so much more than just a bad idea. And that's what was shocking to me as we watched this film and as we've talked through it is it's not just a bad concept, it's not just a bad idea, it's everything. It's everything. So I guess are we ready for the verdict?
That's what I was going to ask. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to cover that we didn't touch upon?
I wanted to say that the little girl at the end of this movie is wearing an Avatar backpack. And I don't know if he had signed on to do The Last Airbender at that point. Probably he did. But I thought that was a little Shyamalan touch.
I know his kids love Avatar, so
or maybe it's just that, yeah.
Yeah, it could be.
Loved Avatar before he got at it.
And then he got at it, and his kids disowned him.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go around and see what you guys vote. It's either going to be a guilty or not guilty for shooting this into the Phantom Zone. Scott?
Oh, you're starting with me? Okay, so I do believe that this was an attempt to make a bad hokey B movie, and I do believe these decisions were made with some sort of intent behind them in order to be bad. However, this is a really terrible movie, and this movie hurts my case of M. Night Shyamalan being a great writer and director. Therefore, I will say guilty. This movie should not be seen by anyone, and you should watch M. Night Shyamalan's good movies instead.
Okay, Matt, on to you.
Yes, whatever he was trying to do, he didn't succeed at. And he shouldn't have inflicted this on us. So, guilty.
Well, I obviously am going to choose guilty as well because this is a painful watch. This is a movie that you're sitting and you're watching it and you're mentally thinking of what other movies you haven't seen recently that you've heard great things about that you want to watch. And that's how I felt watching this. I've seen some really bad movies in the last month and a half, and this was the least enjoyable one to go through. So we are going to end up shooting this into the Phantom Zone for its crimes against humanity, for everything bad that it's done. And Scott, if it makes you feel any better, we can say that, you know what? Everybody gets at least one bad movie. And in M. Night Shyamalan's case, it might be 3 or 4.
Oh, poor M. Night. The Visit was good.
Hey, he's bouncing back, so he'll probably still be making money for a while to come. Lots of movies, probably. He's probably one of those that he's going to start working on smaller budget things, can put him out a lot more. But I see him being a 50-50 type director, depending upon the project that he works on. I don't think he's going to get lots of offers for big budget films.
No, probably not.
But if he takes his time and works on smaller budget films, then I think that he could get his footing back quite easily.
Well, and the most of his success was smaller budget films. I mean, Sixth Sense, for all it wasn't a very big budget film. It was small, it was focused, and it was really good. If anyone out there hasn't seen Sixth Sense, oh my god! Like even knowing the reveal at the end, it's still just an incredible movie. Like the amount of like directorial confidence that movie shows from a director who's just starting out, like it's so good.
Yeah, and I think if you just don't let the ending of Signs bother you, Signs is really great.
Yes,
and that's I don't let that bother. I see that as, oh yeah, it's kind of hokey, but it fits into the metaphor of what he's trying to do so well that I don't know. I can't be bothered by it.
Yeah.
That was back when we were okay with Mel Gibson.
It's every few years thing. Somebody feels okay for him, and then it flips back. So we're probably due. I think that's why he's got like 2 or 3 movies coming out, and one that he's directing now, because it's in that gray area where everybody lets him make something and then goes back to disliking him again. So it'll be interesting.
The next time a voicemail's released.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad that we chose this one and that we were able to send it into the Phantom Zone. I'm thinking that we had a couple glitches as we were going along, so hopefully those get fixed next time. I do have a couple ideas ruminating for this in the future, wanting to open it up to the listeners probably after another show or so, because between the 3 of us I think we can easily choose some bad movies, but as this is a podcast and you live and die by the amount of people that are listening, so I thought it would be fun in the future to open it up basically to you guys to send in suggestions of bad movies that we should watch, and probably do a Twitter poll, either on the Phantom Zoned Twitter feed or the Daly Planet podcast feed, to get people to vote that way, so we can get more audience participation in here. I know that we've got a couple films to kind of pare down for the next one. I want us to go down the rabbit hole pretty hard and dark, since this was a more accessible movie that most people would know. One of the ones that I want to try to get to one of the next 2 or 3 times is a movie called Heart Beeps, which stars Bernadette Peters and Andy Kaufman as 2 robots falling in love.
I've never even heard of that film, but I already know it's terrible just by listening to the explanation. And I love Andy Kaufman, but there's no way that's a good movie.
No. So just before we go, is there anything that you guys want to plug or mention?
So we've got the last week's Kryptonian collection going on. This is kind of the bizarro, if you will, version of that podcast, where those are the greatest movies of all time. These are the worst. So we do that once a month, probably the week before this episode. I'm not sure what we have coming down the pipeline as far as articles on the Daily Planet. I've been really slacking. Oh, my Hamilton article. I'm going to finish it on here, so then I have to, because I've said it, so I have to finish it. So I'm going to finish that up and post that. I got to see that musical a couple weeks ago, and it was amazing.
Yeah, rub it in.
I will.
Matt, what do you got?
I'm working on a sort of one-man show podcast editorial type thing, but it's going very slowly and may be irrelevant by the time I finish it, and thus may not be posted. So,
is that the one that you were talking about a couple days ago?
Yeah, it's going to be essentially, or ideally, would be me discussing discussing the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, with sort of an angle put on it of discussing his involvement with Trump's campaign, because he just gave a speech at the Republican National Convention. Peter Thiel did, the author. So anyway, it seemed I had some thoughts about it, and I thought I would try that podcast format.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think now that you've said it on air, you have to do it. That's how that works.
Exactly.
Yep.
You've got a limited amount of time to make it important, or worst case scenario, you then have years to talk about it.
It's true. Yeah. Well, as long as everyone's comfortable with me recording something while driving in my car,
that seems safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other things we're tossing around, and I think we're going to start this week, on our weekly podcast, we normally would have a news section and a recommendation section, and we've kind of stopped doing that just because we have so much to talk about with these movies. I mean, look at how long we went on just this one. So we have so much to talk about that we want to make sure we get in our time. So we've just been cutting out the news and the recommendations part. But Matt, I think that's something that you and I both really enjoyed doing. So we are going to start a second weekly thing that will drop on Fridays. That will just be, I'm calling it Daily Planet News, where it's just film news, just quick discussions of film news from around the world. what we've been watching on TV, and then a quick update on what movies are coming to theaters that week. And so we're going to be looking to start that on Friday, I think, hopefully. I've said it now,
Awesome.
so I have to.
Yeah, you got to.
And it's a good week to start because Comic-Con was last week, and there's just a whole crap ton of news that came out of that.
Oh, I thought there was never any news that ended up hitting on Saturday and Sunday concerning anything Comic-Con related. Never. You don't have Twitter or email accounts exploding because people are firing off stories every 5-10 minutes.
That was my whole Saturday. It was ridiculous.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening in to this inaugural episode. We'll try to keep these shorter in the future. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
What? No.